Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is road test editor Zach Palmer. What's up, man?
Oh, just here in cold Michigan. I know that most of the news this week's been happening out in nice sunny Los Angeles, but hey, there ain't nothing wrong with Detroit either. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a little cold. It's in the 40s. Just took the dog for a brisk walk. It's kind of windswept, but it still feels a little bit like fall. I like that. You know, sometimes you get into November and people just jump ahead to the holidays. All good, but you know, there's still some leaves out. Sunny, it's cold. Put on my puffer vest and just walked the dog and felt pretty good. So, and it is a little bit warmer out in LA. We're going to talk about the LA show. James Riswick and Joel Stocksdale were out there. Best bet is obviously to check out our full coverage on site, but we're going to give you some of our opinions about what we saw out there. It was a pretty decent show overall. But first, we're going to talk about what we've been driving, and we've been driving some cool stuff. I just got out of a Chevy Colorado ZR2 AEV Bison. This is the one, of course, that AEV tunes. There's some really cool stuff on here. We'll get into it. You did the first drive of the Audi A3 and S3 out in Colorado. I drove the Corolla XSE hatchback. It's pretty fun. I really enjoyed that. And then you actually spent some time, I believe it was also out in California, driving the Acura RDX, and you saw the reveal of the Integra. So we'll get into all of that, and we will spend your money. So, busy show. You should probably start knocking stuff out. Any guesses as to how much this Bison cost?
Oh man, I'm gonna put my first guess right around $55,000 after AEV is done with it. Am I close?
So you are dead on, man.
Wow.
$54,940.
I didn't even cheat either, and I probably have the Monroney.
I was going to say that's kind of shady. Were you like, did you pull this up on one of the fleet files or something? But man, no, you were dead on.
Wow.
Yeah, it's what I would say is this: super cool. It looks super cool. It drives cool. It has the 2.8 liter Duramax Diesel. It sounds like a monster truck. My kid calls it a monster truck. I can see eye to eye with any other guy in a truck in a parking lot when I'm in this thing. 55, I don't know. You don't necessarily need that. But what you do get from AEV, I will tell you right here. I have the Monroney. The ZR2 Bison from AEV gives you, hot stamped boron steel skid plates. So you're going to go over some jagged stuff. You've got some reinforcement there. 17-inch dark graphite aluminum wheels. You could get cool wheels from Chevy on your truck. You don't need to spend the money for that. Front and rear bumpers, wheel flares, which are seriously cartoonish. They really stick out on this thing like a transformer. Embroidered headrests. And yet, of course, this one does have the diesel. So, and an exhaust brake too, actually. A $75 exhaust brake. So, you know, if you want the look, you want to let American expedition vehicles do this stuff, it's definitely a cool vehicle. The ZR2 is not cheap. So really all you're paying for from AEV is just, some of the looks and things like that and the off-road gear, which is only about a $5,700 add-on. The rest of this is a Chevy. It's the AEV stuff and then the $3,700 diesel is what gets this to 55. Without it, you're looking more at basically a base, in the mid 40s range, if you will, like the base ZR2, which to me, that's a sweet spot. That's how I would go. But this thing does look cool as hell, man. Yeah. I know you've driven the ZR2. I think it's a great truck. I think you get a lot of bang for your buck in this segment. And honestly, for me, this reminded me just how much I actually really like the Colorado. It's really a strong player in this segment.
Yeah, no, there is nothing wrong with just a base ZR2. That is one hell of a truck all on its own. You get a big lift, you get the awesome Multimatic suspension, which really, really makes the truck. It both jumps, lands softly off-road, rides super smoothly off-road and rides super smoothly on-road. It handles respectably well as well. And all of those AEV things are really cool, but they're definitely for somebody who's an off-roading enthusiast that, you know, maybe you don't want to go to some parts bin and, you know, just buy a part here, buy a part there, buy a part there. You know, you can sort of just get this package that, you know, lays out your super high clearance bumpers and better skid plates, and it all is wrapped together very nicely and easily from the factory, which is certainly appealing to me, at least, especially on this truck. Greg, you had mentioned there that I've driven this before. Yes, I have off-road, and I think that I've had more fun in this truck off-road than pretty much any other vehicle that I have driven off-road. The way that it handles different terrains is super, super impressive. It's almost like a sort of a magic carpet ride over a lot of huge bumps and bounces that this suspension is capable of handling. You know, there's this, you know, in the mid-sized truck segment, there really isn't anything else that has this kind of a high-tech suspension on it. Obviously, you have stuff like the Tacoma TRD Pro, which is also fantastic off-road, and Nissan's Frontier Pro 4X, which is also super respectable off-road. But for me, there's nothing better or as comparable as the ZR2 off-road in this segment. You sort of have to step up to something like a Raptor to get a similar suspension technology and capability for sort of desert running off-road type stuff.
The Multimatic DSSV, and I'm just going to use the abbreviation here, like the suspension, really cool. I mean, they're yellow on this thing. So like, you know, they're there. You see them. It's, you know, I think we actually tested it for our Tech of the Year a few years ago, actually, on the Colorado. And that was just a cool thing to test, for one thing. But it's, you get a lot of capability. And it's, you know, this is, I think, in some ways, the perfect truck for some people, you know, because it fits in a lot of small spaces. It handles well. The suspension, the Multimatic, like, upgrades actually make it handle quite well on road. It's a little bouncier and jouncier, but, you know, it's a little bit beefier than, say, like the Ford FX4 suspension. I think this is a little bit more capable, depending on what you want to do. Like, this is really for serious off-roaders, whereas FX4, in my mind, is a little bit more like, hey, let's go to the campsite, you know, that sort of thing. You could do some work with this, with the Chevy, with the ZR2. So yeah, one thing that I almost forgot, but because this isn't as maybe widely talked about as it was a few years ago, the 2.8 liter Duramax Diesel. It's an inline four. You're looking at 181 horsepower, 369 pound-feet of torque. It's a really interesting engine, you know, as we're looking at EVs and just, you know, all sorts of different types of displacements going down, some of them going up. A little bit of a, I don't know, I enjoy driving it. I think it's something I drove, Jesus, a few years back, I drove a Canyon prototype with the Duramax Diesel in it right when they were launching this. And it's just, again, this is a very niche engine, if you will. But I mean, I think one thing I'll say is it's rated at 18 city and 22 highway. You know, that seems a little low, I guess, if you will. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, if you want a diesel, you get some grunt with this thing. So it's still out there.
Yeah. No, and the diesel proposition is a cool one for off-road. You know, I really, really loved it in the Wrangler. And I love having that low down grunt, you know, when you're off-roading, trying to rock climb and so on. So, you know, them continuing to offer it in the Colorado is super cool. I know the one that the ZR2 that I drove was just the normal 3.6 liter gasoline V6. And that one was all fine and dandy too. But I think that, you know, you'd probably end up liking the diesel a little bit more, if you're somebody who's into weird stuff like that. You know, if you're buying a ZR2, you're probably a little bit into that weird off-roady stuff already. So this is just a neat, weird proposition that still exists. And it's super cool that it does, to me, even if it doesn't get the greatest fuel economy. it's still a neat offering.
You got to want the driving dynamic from, this kind of a diesel. Because again, the fuel economy, usually like diesels in the city, whatever, but usually they're pretty good on the highway. And the Colorado's not a huge truck. So I guess I was expecting a little bit of a better figure than what I'm seeing here. And, that's fine. You could buy engines just, for their, how you want your vehicle to handle and drive. And I think that's what you do here. And it's only $3,700. So I'd probably go with the 3.6 because I think that's a great engine. GM's been using that in everything for forever. But hey, it's a fun vehicle. So that's the Bison. I'm going to get some social assets over to you here in a little bit. You'll have to check it out. I've got a few. I was at Starbucks, but then there's this construction site behind it. So I need to look at these pictures because I've got the Bison with these like gravel piles and got a TikTok, so all that good stuff. But let's shift gears over to the Audi A3 and S3. I drove one briefly, but you went to the first drive out in Colorado. Give me some initial impressions of this, pretty critical sports sedan for Audi.
I did, yeah. I drove it through some canyons in and around Denver and Boulder, Colorado. Quick note, man, those are some great roads. Video producer Greg Migliore is definitely having a great time out there. That was the first time that I'd really had a good chance to be out there. And the Audi A3, S3 were pretty fun up and down those canyon roads. The S3 particularly fun. The A3 you can definitely tell is one of a sedan for somebody who wants something nicer than say like a Civic. You want the luxury interior, you want a luxury look, get nice big Audi wheels, super great looking LEDs. It's very, sort of like a pug, like a dog rearing up at you. The design is super neat in that way. But the driving experience, if you really, really want, something that is a lot of fun to drive, I think you really got to go with the S3. Obviously that comes with a big price increase. It's, right around $8,000 to $10,000 more than an A3. But what you're ultimately getting with that S3 is an Audiized, sedanized version of the Volkswagen Golf R, which I drove earlier this year. So it sort of spoiled the driving experience of the S3 already for me. But that car was brilliant to drive, and the S3 is also fairly brilliant to drive. The one disappointment that I had with the S3 out there, though, is that Audi doesn't give it the torque vectoring rear differential that the Golf R has, which is a big omission, honestly, because that torque vectoring rear diff was one of the things that made the new Golf R so much fun to drive. And without it, it's a much more standard stroke all-wheel drive system. It doesn't actually yank you around corners or push you through and out like a real torque vectoring system would. That caveat aside, though, man, that 2-liter 4-cylinder engine is a serious firecracker. Sounds the business, and the DCT transmission that they pair with it too is lovely. I found myself just tapping up and down the gears as I went up and down the mountains out there. It's a serious enthusiast car, and there's the RS3 that's coming, and it's going to have that lovely 5-cylinder engine that I know I love, and I'm sure you probably love it too, Greg. But if you don't have $50,000-$60,000, which is at least what that RS3 is going to be, this S3 is an absolutely fantastic car and a really neat alternative if you don't like the hatchback look of the Golf R, or you don't like the complex interior tech that they throw in the Golf R. The Audi is more luxurious, but also more back to basics in terms of its controls and user friendliness. So overall, I really, really like both of them. I'm interested in what you had to say about the A3, Greg.
Yeah, I would say this, it lived precisely up to my expectations, which is a good thing. I like the A3 and the S3. I drove them a few years back in Monaco on the Grand Prix circuit there. This is for the last generation of the car. And, you know, when you have an experience like that, it tends to resonate with you, right? Like you tend to really, like, that's not just a work trip, you know, you really, it sticks with you. And obviously the car sticks with you. So I think, you know, the way they're positioning it then and now is that, you know, this is sort of like a somewhat affordable thinking person's sports sedan. I think they dialed in on the things that they've always done well, which is it handles well, the steering is good. It's a little understated. The S3 does punch things up a little bit, just styling and obviously mechanically. So yeah, I mean, like I would say it was like dead on. I would say it didn't exceed my expectations. You know, there was nothing in there that made me go, whoa, Audi's bringing something new to the fight, or this is, wow, this is takes a leap forward ahead of the rest of the field. So that's where I think, you know, when you launch a product like this, a new version of it, sometimes it's good to have that like aggressive thing that puts you ahead. This is just perfectly staying the course, and that's fine. That's fine. That's probably what most things do in cars and life and whatever. But it didn't blow me away. It was exactly like every A3 or S3 I've ever driven. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not faint praise. And I'm not even, you know, damning it with faint praise. It exactly hit what I thought it was. You know, there was nothing that blew me away. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, where do you put it in the field?
Man, in the field of these,
it's crowded.
Yeah, there's plenty. I mean, you got the CLA, you got the 2 Series Grand Coupe. That BMW is probably unfortunately last amongst those. But I think for me, I'm probably going to have this perhaps sitting second behind the CLA. And the A-Class, you know, I'd sort of group both the CLA and the A-Class together because they're so similar. But, you know, right there, right behind the Mercedes, I think. And then the BMW probably a distant third behind it.
Why do you put the BMW third? I'm just curious.
I really dislike the way that BMW looks.
Okay.
Like really, really don't like it. And I drove the M235i Grand Coupe last year, and it wasn't fun to drive. You know, it's this 4-door sedan from BMW, super small, should be super fun to drive. But it isn't. It's fairly lifeless. The steering, it's some of the worst of the very lifeless steering that BMW has. You can tell that it's very much based on like the X1, X2. And it sort of drives a lot like a mini Clubman, more so than it does a BMW, which was just fairly disappointing. So maybe part of that is expectations are too high, but I think that my expectations should be fairly high if BMW is going to make something that is, you know, sort of an equivalent to say like a hot hatch, like a BMW hot hatch. And it didn't. I'd rather drive this S3 than I would that thing. I'd rather drive the Mercedes-AMG CLA 35 than I would the BMW. So, you know, I should also mention the Cadillac Ct4 because that's also in and amongst this group. That thing's rear-wheel drive and has a lot of horsepower, especially if you get the V with its 2.7-liter 4-cylinder. Haven't driven that one yet, but I imagine that would land very high amongst my rankings had I driven it.
So I drove the CT5, and I drove it in Blackwing trim. So obviously you're like the biggest, most powerful engine, and it is a segment up, to be fair. But I really feel like I would put the CT4 at the top of this class based on what this class is, you know, because to me, and the class does different things. It used to be a little more like a traditional A3. Like at one point, you even maybe paired off the 3 Series into there. Now the 3 Series is bigger. Like this is not a true, like the size has changed. Let's put it that way. And this is definitely more of an entry level, almost like a hot hatch, like you said, segment, where Audi is almost competing with like Volkswagen, which is a sibling thing. It's kind of weird in some ways. And then you drop the Cadillac in there, which to me is, again, a very traditional offering. To me, it seems like that's also what BMW, like there's the signpost for what BMW needs to do in this segment, because the Cadillac is what BMW used to be, like the 1 Series, the 1 Series M Coupe. that was a brilliant car in this segment. The BMW 2 Series Grand Coupe, I feel like, is just the name tells you all of the issues that I think you might have with it. Like, a car in this segment shouldn't be called a Grand Coupe. So in some ways, I would agree with you. Almost by default, I think the Audi does rise to the top. And again, I feel like I keep damning it with faint praise, but it's an interesting segment. And I haven't driven either of the Mercedes recently. So again, that's an area where I'll admit I have a bit of a blind spot. I don't know. If I had to pick one, though, I'd probably go Cadillac, just in this little group right here. Is the Cadillac bigger? Off the top of my head, I don't know. It feels like it's a bigger car, but maybe I'm wrong.
The Ct4 really isn't much bigger than these cars. It definitely, it might be like an inch or two longer than like the A3 and like a CLA, but they definitely compete head to head against each other, especially considering their price. Right. They're like dead on price. So. Yeah, no, I really wish that I could also say the Ct4, and I probably can just based on driving cars on that platform previously, but man, I'm gonna have to keep with that AMG, because that to me has been like the most fun car that I've driven amongst here, and it's also the most hardcore of them easily. The stiffest suspension, the loudest exhaust. It's just a very, very high strung and very, very much more like a sports car than a luxury sports sedan. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's shift things over. Yeah. I spent some time in the Toyota Corolla XSE hatch. A lot of fun, man. This was about $25,000, $26,000. Beautiful car, actually. Really has the hatch look and appearance. It reminded me of some of the early 2010s Mazdas, specifically the 3 probably. It even has a little bit of the silhouette of the Speed 3 from that generation, if you will. This is the manual transmission, which I wasn't expecting. When I got in the car, I was like, oh, hell yeah, this is great, And so it's a lot of fun to drive. It's a great value, like I said, for 25 grand, 26 grand. Good fuel economy. 4-cylinder is like 168, 151 pound-feet of torque. So again, it's like small car, but you can kind of really push it and wring things out. Read some of the specs here. You do get like LED fog lamps. The infotainment's fine. It's like a 7-inch thing. They did some things like chrome colored, so faux chrome around the grille, that sort of thing. Like, it didn't feel like a penalty box at all, and I think that was good. I threw my kid's car seat in there. He had a great time. People thought it was cool, So, I mean, it's interesting because this isn't really where the market is going. But for me, I guess what I really loved about it was the manual transmission. It really, you could wring things out with it. It actually took me back to my early days in the industry when I was sort of starting out, and a lot of like the old guys would be driving the enormous Escalades and things at this time of the year. And the young guys get the hatchback with the stick shift on like summer tires or something as it gets cold out. And like, that's what it was first week in November here. I'm ringing around Michigan in this little Toyota Corolla hatchback. And I'm like, yeah, okay, reminds me. Because we used to have a long-term Mazda Speed 3 at Auto Week, and kind of, takes me back to those days. And that car was way more powerful, way more raw. I like the simplicity and the pure nature of this. So, there's not that many things out there like this. The Mazda 3, which I know is in your life, if you will.
It is indeed.
Volkswagen, like the GTI is like, I mean, that's the Golf if you want, they don't offer any other Golfs, for the Golf R, I suppose, but that's a different thing. Good value.
Yeah. All those things, super, super great things about the Corolla hatchback. They always turn my head whenever I see one go by. But, the biggest problem with me for that car is just the fact that the Civic hatchback exists. And the Civic hatchback is really, really, really good. It's more powerful. It's more spacious. It has better tech for the most part. And it also offers a manual transmission. of course. And those are all really, really great things. You know, what the Toyota has going for it for me is style. I think that it's definitely a more attractive hatchback than the Civic is. But at the same time, that comes at the cost of utility. So, you know, it's a tough ball game between those two. Is it still awesome that Toyota is over here selling a Corolla hatchback with a manual transmission and right around 170 horsepower? Yeah. I mean, maybe that extra, 20-ish horsepower from the Civic doesn't really matter, just because it's so fun to wring out this sweet naturally aspirated engine from Toyota. So it has some really cool things going for it that enthusiasts can like. Sounds like you liked it too. So
Indeed. It's just I'm glad there's cars like this out there. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Not for everybody, but efficient, fun thing to drive, good value. Average new car price is like what, 41 to 44, I've even heard. 44,000. You could get a car like this for 26. Hey, driving's fun. This was a fun car to drive. How was the Acura RDX on the other end of the spectrum?
Acura RDX, yes. So transitioning from fun, maybe personal-ish hatchback to a bit of a compact-ish luxury family. At least you could have a small family in this RDX. So I was out in Los Angeles, and I was doing the first drive for this sort of a mid-cycle refresh for the RDX. If you look at it, you don't really see a whole lot that is, jumping out at you like, oh, they redesigned this, they redid that. No, it really looks a whole lot like the RDX did pre-refresh. There's a new grille, some new lights, new wheels, very, very minor stuff. Some of the big ticket items, I think, though, where they added like a ton of sound deadening to it, which actually sort of hits the nail on the head for some of the things that I've complained about with Acuras in the past. Their 2-liter turbocharged engines are, fairly growly, noisy-ish things, especially if you go and compare them to something like the 2-liter in a Mercedes or a BMW. Those cars are very, very quiet. You can tell that there's a ton of sound deadening in them. The Acura hasn't always been that way. However, for 2022, Acura says it's 20 to 30% quieter. Basically, just depends which trim you get. And in my first drive, I noticed that it was obviously quieter than the previous RDX. So that's super cool, and that Acura is reaching more towards luxury in that way. Other really neat things, just a bunch of added tech. A lot of the stuff that debuted in our long-term TLX and the MDX get added to this, so that's all fine and dandy. You're not leaving the RDX behind, since a lot of people do buy this thing. And lastly, maybe one of the bigger notes here is that Acura is finally letting you equip A-Spec cars with the advanced package, and that's neat because A-Spec has always been the coolest looking Acura in the lineup, whether you go RDX, MDX, TLX. But up until now, you have not been able to equip their advanced package on it, which means you couldn't get the adaptive suspension with the coolest looking car, which is just weird to me, and probably to enthusiasts as well, that the sportiest looking car can't have the sportiest suspension. But that changes with the RDX now, and now you can have exactly that. So big fix there. I'm not really sure why it wasn't that way before, but it's a good thing that Acura did that. So overall, I think the updates make it better. It's a slightly more attractive offering, so to say, but it's not a revolutionary play by any means. It's still the same RDX that we liked pretty well before, and I still like it a good bit now. So 2022 RDX in a nutshell.
Sounds good. I have not driven it, obviously. I think it's one of those vehicles that Acura gives you a little bit of like a style play, if you will, in the segment. I think it's kind of love it or hate it looks. That like they still have remnants of that like beak styling in the front, but I like many of their vehicles. I'm glad to hear that you can actually get a little bit more performance out of, some of these things, line up with the looks than the actual sort of in-vehicle experience. That's good. Like I've been asking this a little bit, but where does this go in the segment now?
That is another tough question, because this one, it for the most part, it's a value play. So loaded up, it really doesn't matter which way you slice it. It's going to be cheaper than, say, like a BMW X3 or a Mercedes GLC class, Audi Q5. It's just going to be slightly more affordable. Now, those cars, they have nicer interiors than this one does. Just more leather, more wood trim, et cetera, et cetera. Better tech, more screens, all of that stuff. Now, that said, you're not really losing anything in the driving experience, I don't think. You get pretty stout 2-liter turbo with this guy that measures up very nicely to pretty much all the other ones, and it handles just as well as those two with SH all-wheel drive. So for a lot of people, I would suggest buying this over, say, like a BMW X3 if you're not, you're not like somebody who's like dead set on, oh, I want the BMW, I want the German luxury. I'd recommend this over like a Lexus NX, probably over like an Infiniti QX50. I would have this over many of the similarly priced crossover competitors. Probably, if you care about driving experience, this is better than a Lincoln Corsair. If you don't really care about driving experience and you just want something luxury and comfortable that is super nice to look at, maybe I'd take a Lincoln Corsair over this one. No, I think it measures up really nicely to that, sort of mid luxury segment, and is definitely the pick in that segment if you care about something that's fun and interesting to drive with your crossover. I do wish it had a Type S. There really should be a Type S version, but that's not coming yet.
That would be logical because, there's some space to put that V6 under there, 355 horsepower. Sounds pretty good to me.
Sounds splendid.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the Integra. This is a car that you don't have to talk about like how it feels or seems sporty. It is sporty, and it's the return of the Integra. I think it's really important for Acura to bring this name back. I think it's important for them to play in the segment. I was impressed with the car, but you were there in person, and you're an Acura guy. Just as far as like outside of work, you own an Integra. What do you think?
Indeed, yeah. This is probably like my dream reveal to go to. Honestly, if I'm going to get a little personal here about it, there's probably no more exciting car that I would have loved to see the wraps taken off of than Acura bringing back the Integra, because like you said, I'm an owner of one. I have a 2001 Acura Integra GSR, which I love and cherish. So seeing them bring the nameplate back is a pretty big deal for me, and it seems the internet thinks it's a pretty big deal too, because just looking over the comment count for our stories here, they're in the triple digits. Which is pretty high, and I know that there's been a lot of commentary online. People like it, people don't like it, people are disappointed. I'm on the fence of I like this thing. I like this thing a lot. It in a way it goes back to the Integra's roots. In a way, it doesn't. And in the way that it doesn't, of course, is it's a big old 4-door hatchback, and I know a lot of people were looking for a 2-door coupe, because that's what everybody has in their minds about what an Integra should be. However, Acura did make 4-door versions of this car. Mine is a 2-door, but the 4 doors have always existed up until the RSX generation at the end. So in that way, I really like it. And, this thing is going to drive really, really well. So we don't have any like huge confirmation that this is basically the Civic Si powertrain. But if you look at what Acura said, it's the 1.5 liter turbo. It has an LSD. It's going to have a 6-speed manual. For all intents and purposes, this is looking like it's going to have the Civic Si powertrain just yanked out and thrown in this, which if you remember much of Acura Integra history, that is nothing new. The Integra has always been Civic based. It's always shared a lot with the Civic. You look at the later Civic SIs that basically had the same engines, same transmissions, a whole lot of sharing between those cars. So that tells me right now, 4-door hatchback, Civic Si, powertrain, this thing's going to be really, really fun. There are some important differences to note, though. This car is not super small. This is a slightly longer Civic. I was chatting with one of the product planners there, and it's actually a couple inches longer than the sedan. The sedan is already about 5 inches longer than the Civic hatchback. So this car isn't going to be much shorter than, say, the new Acura TLX. It's not a super small car, also not a super large car. This thing has a lot of potential. This is just the beginning. I'm sure that we'll get a Type S down the road that is probably going to share a lot of parts with the Civic Type R that eventually comes our way. So if this level of performance is not satisfactory enough, I imagine that the Type S that is likely to come will more than satisfy any sort of performance wants and desires. Just a side note, love the yellow paint.
There you go. Yeah, me too. That really does. I mean, it's funny how like little things like wheels and paint can just, set off what you like think the idea of a car should be. That could really work. So one thing I'm curious about, did they say why they brought back the Integra?
Other than just pure nostalgia, not exactly. Okay. I chatted with them about like, hey, like when did you decide you were gonna do a new Integra? And their product planner told me basically they laid out everything that the car was going to be. It was going to have this engine, this transmission. It was going to have a hatchback. It was going to be all these things. And they're like, oh, we built an Integra. That's what this is. This is a fun to drive car. It's affordable. It hits all of these, sort of measurements as to like what the Integra was before. So then they decided, well, shoot, we built an Integra. Let's bring the name back and call this an Integra, instead of, what the small Acura has been for a few years now, which is the Acura ILX.
Much better name than the ILX.
Much stronger.
Yes, I spent a lot of time in the ILX when it launched, and then basically didn't change for a few years. Another long-term car I think we had at Auto Week back in the day. I think it had the manual, which made it kind of tolerable, but it was a very unremarkable car, just especially that first like version of it. Well, cool. So that's the Acura Integra. Let's move on to the LA Auto Show. Some good stuff coming out of there. Best bet here is to check out our coverage online. Tons of stuff. James and Joel, like I said, are there. But just kind of like, bench racing this. I think the Porsches stood out to you there, Zach.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of good stuff at the show this year, but both of Porsche's big reveals stood out the most to me. The Cayman Gt4 Rs, nuts, and then the Taycan GTS Sport Turismo is one of the best looking cars I feel like I've seen in a long time. I already loved the way the Taycan looked, loved the way the Taycan Cross Turismo looked. And getting rid of the cladding, lowering it a bit, dressing it up in GTS trim style. I don't think that you could have created a better looking Porsche wagon in my eyes. The thing is drop dead gorgeous, 590 horsepower. It's gonna be so good. I know that those guys that were there and saw it would probably give it even more effusive praise with the looks than I am, but geez, this thing looks so good in red. And then
Porsche does a good job at auto shows of really making their cars pop.
Oh yeah. And then, to get into, even deeper into the enthusiast space, we have the Cayman Gt4 Rs, which Porsche finally giving us what the people want, throwing the 911 GT3 engine into a Cayman, which, man, how many years have we been asking for that? How many years has Porsche been like, no, the 911 is king, the 911 is king, and boom, here it is. GT4 RS with the 4-liter flat six, a lovely 493 horsepower, naturally aspirated, 9,000 RPM. This car is probably going to go down as one of the best Porsches ever, honestly.
That thing is going to rip. It is just going to be such a raw car. But I mean, I'm a big fan of the Cayman, and just to have that engine in it, holy crap, man, that's going to be awesome.
It's going to be absolutely nuts. The price here, what are we looking at? About $143,000 to start. That's a lot of money. It's $40,000 more than a regular GT4, but I don't think that Porsche is going to have any trouble selling a single one of them.
Not a bit.
They're going to go like crazy, and I'm afraid to see what they go for on the after they're sold here, because people are going to be clamoring for these. There's no doubt about it.
Oh yeah, if you're a Porsche enthusiast, I mean, this is in some ways really your car, and especially if you're someone who is like really into tracking things. I mean, I would love to see what this thing could do in the hands of the right person on a track against really anything. But I mean, it's almost a dangerous play. They've always said the 911 is king. Well, okay, let's get somebody behind the wheel with this thing, and away we go, right?
It's going to be really good. Now that said, now that you did mention track time, it is slower than a GT3 around the Nürburgring. So there's one thing. 911.
I mean,
the 911 superiority continues.
Fair enough, but I mean, I don't know. That's an interesting metric. But yeah, good point. And obviously I can see why the 911 would win in a circumstance like that. But I don't know. Let's go up to Lime Rock or something and see who.
Very good point.
Who wins?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so that's the Porsches at the LA Auto Show. I've got a couple things that stood out to me. I like the Toyota BZ4X. Wow, what a name. And the much easier to say Subaru Solterra. I think they're essentially the same vehicle, kind of an EV, electric SUV, like just play, if you will, jointly developed. And I think we knew they were coming, but I was like a little bit surprised actually when I saw the pictures and got to look at some of the specs. Like, hey, this is really cool, and this is like an accessible, vehicle for a lot of people. So I think that's definitely a winner, if you will. Really excited about that. 220 miles of range, according to the EPA. So that's not nothing. And it's going to be a reasonable price.
They feel like very normal EVs. I don't see much that is super gimmicky on them. They're electric cars, sort of like the ID4, that are fairly normal, and you don't have to be some like bleeding edge tech person like a Tesla buyer many times is to really get behind it. It's sort of like, I don't know, like a RAV4 but electric, which makes a lot of sense. So I think that's what a lot of people have been waiting for with EVs.
Speaking of EVs, I also like the Fisker Ocean. Kind of a funny name for a car, but a good one, I think. This one you can actually get a base one for about $37,500. It's pretty good. According to John Snyder here, our green editor. That's the entry level with sport trim, 275 horsepower, 250 miles of range. And I'm just reading from his report. You should check it out because he has the video in there too of the reveal. Good looking crossover. I think Henrik Fisker knows how to design things, obviously. And he made a small crossover look pretty good. So that was another one. I think I'm going to go with my things I think you should look at. Small electric crossovers. Looks pretty good. I'm dating myself here, but I actually went to the reveal of the Fisker Atlantic in New York a few years back. Different company, in fact, I believe, a different Fisker.
Yeah.
The Atlantic or the Atlantique, I don't know. He was He does a good job of getting pretty simple, kind of almost like retro names. Like the Ocean seems like something like Lincoln or Ford or Buick would have named their cars back in the 50s, that sort of vibe. The Atlantic, they sound like cruise ships or ocean liners. But obviously different world, but cool. So check out our full coverage.
That Fisker Atlantic still sort of exists. I mean, it's sort of the Karma Rivero now. So
yeah,
same thing. It's slightly old, but it's also still new. So
indeed, it lives on. It lives on. Yeah, I totally forgot about that connection. That's right.
But yeah, Fisker, Karma, maybe drop an LS V8 in it, at some point in the middle there.
Yeah, right. Bob Lutz gets his hand on
it. Exactly.
Man, that car has had a lot of different owners and applications and all sorts of things.
No kidding. At this rate, the Ocean will have eight names by the time it's retired. But
this is hilarious. I'm really dating myself on this. I'm looking up the Fisker Atlantic because I was trying to remember like what was what. And the top reference in Wikipedia is a story I wrote for Auto Week, September 3rd, 2012.
That's awesome.
So
that you're the top reference in Wikipedia.
Top reference in the Wikipedia story. Anyways, let's go back to the present and spend some money. This comes from Lamont. Aloha, folks. I'll keep it short and sweet. Now that I'm in my early 30s, I'm looking to cash in on some of my nostalgia and purchase one of my poster cars from my childhood and teen years. Sounds good, man. Only requirements are that it needs to be from the 2000s, not a two-seater. I already have one in the garage, and he prefers a manual. Okay? It's got to be on the sporty and fast side. Must be under 20 grand to purchase. Here are his candidates in order. An 04 to 07 Volvo V70R in flash green metallic, and/or with the Atacama interior, manual only. Same thing, only this is the Volvo S60R. BMW E39 M5, but can only afford high mileage. Bad idea. Are these expensive to maintain? Probably.
Yeah.
99 to 03 Saab 9.3 Viggen. These are getting hard to find. I was just Googling these. We were discussing this off camera. Yeah, man, they are hard to find. Or you go with an 05 to 08 Acura TL Type S manual only. Some interesting stuff. You're really going like back into like turn of the century, sport vehicles, if you will, sports cars, sport, things. You're definitely going down kind of like the lesser known path, the less traveled path here, no GTIs or things like that. A little bit perplexing. So I guess with that, I'll toss it over to you there, Zach.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I struggled with this one more than I normally do with these. I saw your list there. I've actually driven a Volvo S60R before. It was a manual. It was slightly worse for wear. So you might struggle to find one that is actually nice and that is held up. But if you do find one, it's definitely more Grand Tourer than sports car. Very unlike the Saab 9.3 Viggen that you list there, or like a TL Type S. But I'm going to go off script for my pick. I saw your BMW M5, and I will raise or maybe lower you a BMW M3. I'd go with the E46. Now, it's definitely cheaper than an M5. Obviously those M5s that you can afford around 20 grand are very high mileage. And yes, your question of are they expensive to maintain is yes. Yes, they absolutely are expensive to maintain. And the same would go for an E46 M3. However, you're starting off at a lower price, and you at that point though you're honestly bumping right into your $20,000 purchase maximum. So that would be my sort of aspirational pick. Go and find an E46 M3. If you're okay with a convertible, that would be the cheaper one. Although you say that you don't want a two-seater, and for all intents and purposes, an M3 convertible is sort of a two-seater. So maybe go find a sedan and find a manual there. And then if that's too expensive, which in our market these days might be, honestly, at this point, wait a few days and the price goes up $3,000. Then the TL Type S would be my safe choice. It is for sure going to come in under your dollar amount. Still be a lot of fun. Not as fun as the M3, but certainly more reliable and cheaper to maintain overall. So aspirational pick, cheaper, safer pick right there. Greg?
All right, that's pretty well thought out. I'm going to go basically in order of want. He says no 04 to 07 Volvo V70R, again, in flash green metallic. I would probably look pretty hard at that. I think that is a very unique option on this list. Let's put it that way. You're going to get some attention. I think you're going to get some functionality with that too. I think that's kind of neat. Nothing wrong with driving a Volvo station wagon from the turn of the century. I think that's kind of a neat thing. So I'd look at that. There's actually kind of a cool Motor Trend review from, a road test from 2004. You can find that pretty easily by Googling. And it really lays out just from that time how this, like this wagon really, like what it could do well and why you would like it then and why it might still hold up now. It's definitely that period of like Volvo design before I think they became these gorgeous luxury pieces. So it sounds like you like this era of Volvos. That's great. You're going to like this too. But for me, I kind of liked what came before it and then what came after it, if you will. Like I like how Volvos are now. And in the 90s, I could kind of get on board with them too a little bit when they were a little boxier. This isn't my flavor of brandy, but I can see why, it might be yours. That's cool. So that would be my pick. I would just say like, this is a little bit different, but different is good. I would take a swing at this, see what you can find. And I think just the adventure of finding this relatively rare vehicle could be fun in of itself. So that's how I would land. And of course, an older BMW 3 Series or M3, again, expensive, not a bad fallback choice. The 08 TL Type S, interesting. I think I actually drove that car. Again, interesting. Good transmission, good manual transmission. So other stuff to just have on your list. But yeah, man, I would go with the Volvo. I think that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's not a bad choice. The guy that lived below me in my house, it was sort of a 2-story house in college, actually had a V70R. Was one of those years. I can't remember which one, but he had that, and I always parked my Integra next to him because I knew that he would never door ding me, because I knew this guy knows and he cares. It's a sweet looking car, really is, and I know that he really liked his too. So never a bad choice, I feel, to go with a Volvo station wagon.
Sounds good. Well, we can leave it there. Send us your spend my monies at podcast@autoblog.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.